Welcome to our program. I'm John Veneri, sitting in for your regular host of this week, Chris Ferrara. Christopher Ferrara right now is on an airplane going back home, and I'm sitting in for him. He's going back to the United States. We are here in the studios in Rome, and this is our special series, Habemus Papam. We have a Pope, on the election, the conclave, and the election of Pope Francis. And we're here in the studio with Father Gruner. And of course, there's plenty to talk about regarding the Pope, regarding the message of Fatima, regarding what many people are putting together as the name Francis and Francis's call to rebuild the church. But yesterday was Pope Francis' inaugural Mass, where he received the pallium, he received the ring, and it was the first public Mass of the Pope in St. Peter's Square. And I think we have some footage of that we can run when the Pope first came out on what they call the Pope Mobile just before the Mass. I think we can run that footage now if it is ready. This is St. Peter's, March 19th. This is about 9 o'clock in the morning, about a half hour before the Mass is going to begin. Making his way through the crowd. Of course, it is a Catholic audience, so they will love the Pope.
See the flags of Argentina being flown.
The various flags are there. And he has the open Pope Mobile. He's not using the bulletproof glass, which is interesting.
He doesn't want to have so much security around him.
Yeah, so that was the initial entrance of the Pope, as it were. And we knew ahead of time that that's what he would do, come out into the crowd. I think at one point, too, he stopped and said, gave a special greeting to a handicapped person or something like that. And then came the special ceremony where he actually receives what's called the pallium and the fisherman's ring, the symbols of authority. And I think we have a little footage of that here now. And maybe you could tell us about the significance of the pallium, Father.
Well, the pallium is a stole which is given to archbishops that shows his authority as Pope. And the pallium, of course, is especially connected to St. Agnes, the martyr, the young martyr, about 13 years old. And the lamb that the wool is made from is collected on that day, or blessed at on her feast day.
And now here he's receiving the fisherman's ring. And what's the significance of that?
Well, the ring is that, it's what he uses, or actually have a duplicate of it, which he uses to seal his papal documents. And of course, the ring is the same picture as that of the other popes, but the name is different. Of course, they changed the name, and they scratch the ring from the other one to destroy the ring, so that it can't be used again once the papacy is over. Such as when February 28th came, they scratched the ring. Father Lombardi told us himself that he saw them scratch the ring, which means you could not make another impression with it. And I think there's about 5 copies of it altogether.
Mm-hmm. So at that point, he's fully invested with the power of the papacy. And from there, they moved into the Mass. We have a little footage of that as well, the first Mass of Pope Benedict. Here we see him on the Jumbotron at the Vatican. Gregorian chant playing in the back, well, more than the background. It was very much forward.
Yes, there's Latin singing, of course, beautiful singing. Also talked about the singing. It was Christ, Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christ rules, reigns, and is in Christ the King.
Yes, especially with the pallium and the ring, they had the litany of the saints that was chanted, and interspersed with that was the Christ reigns in Latin. Yes. But the entire Mass was done in a very dignified manner. It was sacred music or an organ or at various, I think either before or after, I don't think during the Mass, there was also a brass ensemble. So there was a sense of majesty to the Mass. And I was watching the Mass from the roof of the colonnade because with most of the journalists, we were decanted up there. And we have some footage of what it was like on that roof. We were all kind of huddled together there and all kind of vying for a spot at the edge.
The statues are there on top of the colonnade.
The statues on the colonnade. They're much bigger, of course, when you're there. And I'm amongst them somewhere there.
And you didn't have much room to take pictures in.
Well, you had. It was like in the old medieval castles, they would have these thin little windows, and for the archers to shoot this way and shoot that way. And so you couldn't get shot. It was a very narrow window. And that's what I felt like when I was up there. I was between the two statues, and you had just this little bit of room to move.
Yes.
But still, it was a privilege to be there. I mean, how many times in one's life can one be in Rome for conclave, and that very dramatic evening when the cardinal comes out and says, "Habemus Papam, we have a pope," and you learn who he is and the name he's going to take. And then, of course, the inaugural mass. I'd say, most Catholics go through their life not having the opportunity to be here for this, and it was good to be here. It was a great opportunity to be here for this. And finally, of course, talking about an opportunity to be here, we have a group of young people from France, who clearly are very enthused about the new pope, and we have, there they are. There they are. So the Pope is going to appeal to the youth, no matter who the Pope is, because he's called Holy Father.
Yes.
He's not Holy President. He's not Holy CEO. He's not Holy Boss. He's Holy Father. And there's a very strong sense of paternity with the office of the papacy.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And you talked about that in your service from a few days ago, but the word holy means, of course.
Yes, and it's to preach a holy doctrine that is attached to the goodness and the truth of God Himself, and also to be as far removed as possible from all that is evil, from all that is unclear, from all that is ambiguous. That is the duty of the Pope, really, to steer us in this way.
And that's what he keeps coming back to, the theme of truth, beauty, and goodness. In various speeches, one he gave on Saturday to the press, he's also spoken about that again, truth, beauty, and goodness. And so certainly the truth is what you emphasized in your service about, if we're going to teach the faith, you have to teach the holy faith, you have to teach the Catholic faith, you have to teach the true faith, the one faith. And that is what this first job is, to be as a teacher.
Well, that is. Today, of course, with so much media and so much discussion, and so many talking heads on television who really don't know what they're talking about when they're talking. There's a lot of talk about what the Pope's job is, to be a man of peace, to be a man of unity, to be a man of all these things. All these things are good, and all these things are true. Well, these things are secondary to the Pope's primary duty, because the Pope's primary duty is to teach the truth, to teach the Catholic faith, as it has always been taught throughout the centuries, as Vatican I tells us, in the same meaning and in the same explanation as what the Church always taught.
Yeah. The Pope has not got the job to teach a new doctrine, for example.
No, in fact, Vatican I even defines that. It's even defined that the Pope himself does not have the power to teach a new doctrine. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as truth.
Yes.
If an individual on his own authority could just say, well, for 2,000 years, we've said there's 3 persons in the Trinity, and I'm telling you now that there's 4 persons in the Trinity. That means that for 2,000 years, it was never true that 3 persons were the Trinity. Right. The Pope is, I know I just said he's not the president, but in a certain sense, we understand the papacy better when we understand that he is not the boss, he is not the president.
He can't just say, it's my will today that we're going to change the doctrine of this or change the doctrine of that.
He is the vice president, and vicar. Christ is the president. He's the vicar of Christ.
And Christ, of course, is Christ the King, as the hymn talks about. He's Christ is King and Christ is priest, and and he's the sanctifier. So we're one Lord, one faith, one baptism. We have one baptism, one sacramental system, one Lord who is God, and of course, we obey his vicar when he obeys God. And of course, they usually do. Sometimes there have been cases in history. I think we mentioned Torquemada, St. Thomas, and St. Robert Bellarmine, all talking about when that happens. Of course, we have to follow God. As St. Peter himself said, we must obey God rather than men. So it's important for us to realize that he's not the big boss. He's, as he himself said on Saturday, he said, really, what the Pope does is not as important as coming closer to Christ, being part. Mm-hmm. So, of course, being Catholic, the way by obeying the laws of the Church, by obeying what the Church has always taught, by obeying the teachings of the Pope, which are just reinforcing what the Church has always taught, is a way to come closer to Christ. We do need someone visible, but at the same time, we must pray for the Pope, as he himself many times asked us to pray for the Pope. He said, and of course the message of Fatima tells us to pray for the Pope. And the message of Fatima wants to instill in the minds of not just Catholics, but everybody, the importance of the papacy, because that's why the grace of world peace has been reserved to the Pope, and the Pope alone giving the order to the bishops to consecrate Russia. We can talk about why Russia, but let's first of all focus on it is the Pope to do the consecration. It's the Pope to tell the bishops to do the consecration. It's when the Pope does this obedience and when the bishops do this obedience together with the Pope, then we'll have peace. And so when the whole world sees that this peace that comes to the world, there's no other way to have peace. Or he said, without that consecration, the world cannot have peace. And so if we help the Pope, we support the Pope with our prayers and with our petitions and with our telling everyone else about this request, then we will help towards bringing about world peace, because it's the only way we can have it is by the obedience to Our Lady of Fatima's request, for the command more exactly. And our Lord himself said that the King of France gave a bad example. The kings of France, like from 1689 to 1789, for 100 years did not obey the order to consecrate France to the Sacred Heart. And as a result, we had the French Revolution. The King of France had his head chopped off. And our Lord says, make it known to ministers, given they follow the example of the King of France, in delaying the execution of my command, like the King of France, they'll follow him into misfortune. And so we're trying to save the neck of Pope Francis. We're trying to save the neck of the bishops who are pictured in that image of after the Pope gets shot with arrows and bullets, then bishops are, then priests are, religious, and so forth. Then lay people are too. We're trying to save that from happening by promoting, making knowledge of this consecration request. People, we don't make this up. It's all in the books. It's all there. It's all for anyone to see.
Yes, and it gets us back to what we were saying earlier about the primary duty of the Pope. Of course, Our Lady of Fatima is reinforcing that, but we can look at the primary duty of the Pope as threefold. First, to teach the truth as it has always been taught throughout the centuries, without updating or modernization or anything like that, in the same meaning and in the same explanation, as we know. Secondly, it is to protect the flock from poisonous doctrine, to protect the flock from error.
And we see that also in church history. Not only to protect the flock from the error, but also from those promoting the error.
Yes.
So when Nestorius, for example, was promoting, he was the second highest ranking churchman in the world, and he promoted the idea that Mary was not the mother of God. And so it was Cyril, Saint Cyril, who came to Ephesus and held a council in the Pope's name and condemned the error, and also then Nestorius, who would not accept the correction, was deposed from his position. So it's not enough just to correct, say this is wrong. First of all, the teaching should be clear. So when they teach the clear doctrine, they also say this is erroneous. That's what the church has always done. This is a clear doctrine, this is a true doctrine, they're the opposite, and these are the opposite ones. They're all erroneous and they're condemned. And then they say, and if the people don't submit to the truth of this, then we remove them from office, from teaching the error.
Well, that's the point. That's the third point I was going to make. So the first is that to teach the truth as it has always been taught throughout the centuries. Second, to protect the flock from poisonous doctrine. And thirdly, to discipline. To discipline those who, especially who call themselves Catholic, but are teaching and promoting something that is against natural and divine law. So the Pope has the duty, of course, to discipline wayward bishops. The Pope has the duty to discipline a wayward seminary. The Pope has the duty, or at least the bishops have the duty, to correct, say, politicians who call themselves Catholic, but who promote abortion, who promote all these things that are, as I said, not only contrary to divine law, but contrary to nature itself. It's contrary to nature for a mother to kill the baby in her womb.
Of course. And
so,
of course, when
so those are the three things.
We're talking about the natural law, is the term is used in theology and philosophy, but the natural law itself is, of course, the author of the natural law is God himself.
Sure, yes.
So, but the difference between natural law and divine law is that natural law can be known by the light of reason alone. Now, if people don't want to refuse to see that, it doesn't mean it can't be seen by reason alone. People don't, we don't go around killing our fellow man because it's bad, and it's instinctively written on our hearts not to do that. Well, a baby is still a fellow man. We can't go around, even if the baby's in the womb of someone, it's still one of our fellow men. We can't go around killing that person, the innocence. And so for politicians to say, well, personally I'm against abortion, but I don't want to impose my, No, it's everyone understands. Everyone recognizes. For those who say they don't understand, they're a bad will. They've made themselves blind to this truth. And so the church, to be consistent, has to refuse communion to politicians who. Now, it's one thing if somebody might have this opinion, but the parish priest or the bishop doesn't know it. But for those who are publicly proclaiming this falsehood and saying, I'm a good Catholic, but I'm going to vote for abortion, or I'm not even going to vote against abortion. I remember Pius XI when he said that the politicians, that the legislators, more precisely, legislators have the positive obligation to legislate with appropriate laws and sanctions, not just say we're against it, but to enforce it with appropriate sanctions, punishments.
Well, sure. I mean, any father or mother of children knows that you just can't say don't do that. You have to say don't do that or else. There has to be an or else.
Yes.
That's why most people obey speed limits, because you get a ticket. That's why people do a lot of things because don't do a lot of things because they will be punished, no matter how old they are, whether they're in their 20s or 30s or 40 or 50s. If you step out of line, if you exceed the speed limit, if you throw trash on the ground or whatever, you're going to be punished. Well, for some reason, especially since the Second Vatican Council, we've had this idea that we should just teach the truth and let the power of the truth work. And the people are of such goodwill, man is of such goodwill, that once he hears the truth, he'll just follow it. And so we have to do away with this childish threatening of condemnations, threatening of anathemas. But as Romano Amerio says, the correction of error and the condemnation of error and the threatening of anathemas is itself a great work of charity. It's a true work of charity because you correct those who are on the wayward path, and it serves as a warning to those who are still on the good path not to turn the wrong way.
Yes. Well, the first charity of all is to help people save their souls. So it should not be used as an excuse for not helping a person who's injured or who's lonely or something like that. We should help them with the temporal works of mercy, but the spiritual works of mercy are greater, and certainly correcting the ignorant or teaching the...
Sure, and it doesn't have to be done. I mean, people automatically think, well, then you're going to be nasty.
Yeah.
No, you don't have to be nasty. A father who really loves his children can keep them in line without ever having to raise his voice.
Yes.
It's done with love.
Yes.
And the children know Dad cares.
Yes.
And even if they don't understand it at the time, they know later on, yes, Dad cares. How many times when people grow up, they said, my father cared about me enough not to let me do anything I wanted.
Yes.
Yeah, that's how he really showed his love. And the people who are spoiled, they say, my father failed me. He gave me anything I wanted. Yes. So discipline done with love, done with moderation, and done within the context of the truth,
yes, absolutely,
is the greatest charity that we can have. And so that's why I bring up those 3 points of the papal duty to teach the truth, to protect the flock from error, and to discipline, because we have to face it, in the last 50 years, those 3 things have fallen by the wayside.
Not entirely.
Not entirely, but we do have this crisis of faith where the faithful don't know the truth, where the faithful are not protected from error, and where discipline has just been blown sky high.
Well, I think, for example, with Paul VI in his encyclical on human life, he does say very clearly in there that contraception is clearly wrong. And you also have Pius XI saying that each act of contraception is a mortal sin. Now, the problem is that the bishops and the priests are not passing that on to their faithful. So many Catholics today think it's okay, or they can avoid having children, if they want to have a second car or a bigger house or another television set or whatever it is. No, that's not enough reason to even practice natural family planning. They have to have a serious reason. That teaching has not been taught. And the whole thing, there's been the confusion since the Vatican Council of the purpose of marriage. The purpose of marriage is the procreation and education of children. That's the primary purpose. The second purpose is certainly the consolation of the husband and wife. But the first purpose, when it comes to conflict of interest between the two, it has to be primarily for the procreation and education of children as the first one. And a lot of theologians have messed it up since the Second Vatican Council.
Well, this has been a problem too, because if you remember, in 1968, this is why I talk about the problem of discipline. In 1968, when Pope Paul VI did promote Humanae Vitae, which did reinforce he didn't make up a new doctrine, it was just reinforcing what the Church always taught, theologians and even bishops' conferences in Canada rose up against it. The bishops in the United States, they put out a pastoral letter supposedly in support of Humanae Vitae, and in that pastoral letter, there was a little line that talked about norms for licit dissent. So basically what they said is everything that we've told you about having to listen, heed, and obey this law, well, if you have there are various exceptions or various ways where you can dissent from this teaching. Well, once you do that, I'll go back to the example of being a parent. Once you say you have to do this, you have to obey this law, but if you find a reason not to obey it, then you're free to disobey it. You've killed the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we've had this breakdown of discipline that the bishops themselves were not disciplined when they didn't enforce it, or like in Canada, when they seemed to actually speak against it.
Well, what they said was that you have a right of conscience, but the whole right of conscience is that conscience is the first norm, but you have the obligation to inform your conscience. St. Thomas tells us that if you don't inform your conscience, if you keep yourself in ignorance for the purpose of being able to be more free to sin, he says you're more guilty by that technique. So it's not just conscience, it's not enough. Conscience, which is informed, because people, the capacity for self-deception, we have Pope Benedict XVI telling us that he who thinks the prophetic mission of Fatima is concluded deceives himself. Well, if you can tell us that there's deception of cardinals and bishops about Fatima, there's also deception of the people about the teaching the Church has always taught, and saying, well, I'm a good Catholic, but I disagree with this. No, you can't be a good Catholic if you're disagreeing with what the Church has always taught.
So I think we have a better understanding of why Our Lady of Fatima said, pray a great deal for the Holy Father. Because no matter who the Pope is, no matter who would have been elected, he has this huge task in front of him. And we might talk about this on a second program, there's a lot of talk about Francis will reform the Church. Well, the term reform is really an elastic term anymore. Well, you'll talk to, I guarantee you would talk to 10 different priests and even 10 different bishops. In what does true reform consist? And because of the confusion and the disorientation of the past 50 years, my guess is you would get 10 different answers, depending on the orientation of the person you speak with.
So the whole idea is to, when you're talking about reform, or more exactly, renew, and as St. Francis of Assisi was told by our Lord that we must, Francis, go and rebuild my church because it's falling down. Of course, St. Francis first understood this as being the building he was in, the Church of San Damiano near Assisi, just outside the walls. But what our Lord meant was to rebuild the Catholic Church because of the corruption inside. But he did that by his example, and he did that by drawing to himself and drawing to God many people to follow his way of life. And I think that we need to have that true reform, which is to rebuild the church that Christ founded.
Well, that's it. I mean, it has to be done in the truth.
Yes.
True reform has to come about in the truth. Just laying out a new series of rules, just laying out this person's not going to be in the Curia anymore, but we're going to put this person in, we end up with a very positivistic, naturalistic approach to actually fixing the problems in the church, which at the heart is a crisis of faith itself. And so there can be no real reform without a restoration of the true, full Catholic faith of the centuries. That's what we pray for. That's what Our Lady of Fatima was all about. Nothing in her message had any aggiornamento. Nothing in her message said anything about ecumenism. Nothing in her message said anything but what the Catholic Church taught and practiced for 2,000 years. And this is the type of reform that we have to pray for. Whether we get it with Pope Francis or not, people are still debating that. But that's the one that we have to pray for and work towards.
Well, we see the angel of Fatima came and gave the children Holy Communion. He, first of all, taught them to adore the Blessed Sacrament, first of all. And as the fathers of the Church have said, as Father Papal Paul VI said, before receiving the Blessed Sacrament, we are obliged to adore the Blessed Sacrament, first of all. That's Church teaching for 2,000 years. Besides that, then he gave communion on the tongue to Lucy, so that no particles would fall in there. And even the law today still is communion on the tongue. Even the permission, the indult that Paul VI gave on that regard, it's dated in May of 1968, I think it is. And in there he still says there's 7 rules and 2 principles must be followed if communion is given on the hand. Unfortunately, there are priests, even in St. Peter's Square, who don't understand that. The care must be taken that no particle falls from their hand. There must be no scandal given. Care must be taken. If they don't use the patent, how are they going to catch particles?
Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways, and I say this with respect, but in some ways they've set up an impossible law. Because it's really impossible to give communion in the hand without scandal being given.
Yes.
It's impossible to give communion in the hand without particles being left in the person's palm. But that is, I think, an issue for another program. We could talk quite a bit about that, especially in the light of Our Lady of Fatima.
Yes.
But this program is coming to a close. And so what we're going to be doing is in the next program, we'll be picking up more about this dramatic week in the Vatican, Habemus Papam, a new pope, Pope Francis from South America, from Argentina. Our Lady of Fatima said, pray a great deal for the Holy Father. And, I don't think we should just say this as something to say, but as we said before the conclave, we had said, do something extra that the right man be elected. Now that Pope Francis has been elected, we can do something extra every day, an extra decade of the Rosary, to pray for the new Pope.
We must pray for the new Pope. I don't see we're out of time now.
Okay. So we will see you next time. Thank you.